Hey buddies, Miss Puggy here, coming at you with another Borderlands 3 video. Today I'm coming at you with a revamped level 72 Iron Cub build that focuses on dealing the most amount of damage with Iron Cub. If you guys see my original video with the level 65 version of this, you'll know that this build just one-shots pretty much everything except for some bosses. Like Grave Ward, it can't actually shoot, and it couldn't one-shot the raid boss, but that's okay. And I try to add a bunch of new items since we got a bunch of new items with the director's cut, and I'll be showing you those shortly. But before we get into it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. You have no idea how much it helps me out, and let's get into it. So first things first, I want to talk about the Guardian Angel real quick. Not because it's good with this build, but because it doesn't work with this build, and I don't want anybody to go into an Iron Cub build or Iron Bear build and assume that the Guardian Angel works with it. I've tested it multiple times and I haven't seen it work with a single weapon or anything with Iron Cub, which is really unfortunate. But I do have it here in case we want to throw grenades, so I do have a Guardian Angel on this build, but it doesn't amp Iron Cub's damage itself, so be warned on that if you're ever trying to make a modification of this build. So now that that's out of the way, let's move on to the Flare. So Flare is a great class mod. Flare works with Iron Cub to allow you to increase your damage as Moze and Iron Cub at the same time. So when you send Iron Cub out there, you're going to have 2 times damage with both characters at the same time. It's very useful because this build does specialize keeping your fuel count at a high amount at all times, and it doesn't diminish very fast, so you're going to be able to optimize the Flare bonus as much as possible and as long as possible. The secondary stats I have on that is the weapon critical damage, splash damage radius, and splash damage. Splash damage is obvious. It's a multiplier that's very useful on any Moze build. Critical weapon damage is on this build because Iron Cub can crit, so that can be very useful on there. And splash damage radius is just a little bonus I have on there to increase the amount of splash damage. Ultimately, I would like to have action skill damage on this class mod, but I don't. But maybe you guys will find the god roll for that. On top of that, I have a Elemental Projector Victory Rush. The Elemental Projector part doesn't matter too much because we don't have any weapons that would allow us to activate the sellout to give us bonus shock damage. But if you wanted to try that, you could use the Revolter action skill start to get shock dot on your sellout so you can get the Elemental Projector. It would increase your damage a lot. I would only recommend that with bossing, but I haven't seen any bosses that doesn't die in one shot with this build, so I found it unnecessary, but you could totally try that if you'd like. The secondary stats we have is area of effect damage. Once again, splash damage, very useful, and then shock damage since we're going to be dealing primarily shock damage, so that's very useful. The main important thing here is Victory Rush. Victory Rush gives us a 18% increased damage whenever we kill a badass, and that has been patched to work now. It didn't work in the past, so if you guys were unaware, now you know that this works properly and will boost your damage with Iron Cub as well. And next we have a Recurring Hex. The reason why we have a Recurring Hex is because this allows us to just apply a fire dot, which allows us to proc a bunch of skills in our skill tree to make our fuel never diminish, basically passively, because you're going to have an uptime of the Hex almost all the time because of this little anointment here. While Iron Cub is active, taking damage has a 20% chance to spawn a grenade. This is very useful. When the Iron Cub takes damage, you shoot the grenade out of your body itself. Make sure never to be looking at the ground or next to a wall because you can down yourself if the Recurring Hex anointment decides to proc when you're against a wall. It will down you instantly. But besides that, it's just a very awesome passive grenade to have to just constantly proc your fire dot on all the enemies with fire and skag den. Next we have the Infernal Wish. The Infernal Wish basically just doubles our DPS, and it has the anointment after exiting Iron Bear kills increase Iron Bear's cooldown rate by 30%. Very useful to have with this build because once you lose Iron Cub, the cooldown is kind of hefty since it diminishes all its fuel. You won't get any returns by exiting Iron Bear since you can't do that with Iron Cub, so you need this anointment if you want to get Iron Cub out there as much as possible. Infernal Wish just allows us to double our DPS on all of our weapons. Primarily, I like to use it with our weapon here, Plasma Coil, which has, while Iron Bear is active, railgun damage is increased by 150%. That's very useful. That allows us to deal 150 million damage with the railguns with Iron Cub, which is insane for Iron Cub damage. And if you get really close to the enemy, the change from the railgun will chain to your body onto the enemy, which allows you to hit the enemy multiple times with the chain, and you easily deal 300 million damage just like that. It's awesome. On top of that, Plasma Coil is just a very awesome gun. You don't really need any build to make Plasma Coil work. One orb and it kills an enemy just like that. It's very easy. So Plasma Coil is just good on any build. And since we're trying to optimize the shock damage, why not use the Plasma Coil? Coil. Next, I do have a sellout just in case you want to proc your elemental projector with action skill start revolter. Most of the time I don't use the sellout unless I'm going for a particular combo, but the combo is there if you want it, so the sellout is useful to have on this build in case you want to use that revolter combo. And then next I have a burning scourge with the anointment railgun damage is increased. The scourge is just a really good rocket launcher. I like to use it when I'm downed or if I'm just trying to have a little bit of fun and just shoot the skies and all the rockets just rain down on the enemy. I can use the elemental projector with the sellout to allow us to get the bonus damage on the scourge from the elemental projector, but most of the time I'm using my plasma coil, so I don't get the option to use that sellout combo, but that is there in case you want to use that combo. Now the main thing you want to do with this build is basically activate Iron Cub as soon as possible and maybe throw out some grenades out there near the start, because when you summon your Iron Cub, because of the skill tree, you will notice that the fuel is not 100%. Because of that, you want to get a fire dot on an enemy as soon as possible to refuel your fuel, thus allowing you to get the optimal flare bonus damage. Then pretty much you want to just start blasting away the plasma coil. Each orb deals 8 million damage plus, so you're able to kill basically any enemy with one shot. If it's a badass, you'll basically beam them down really quickly. And while I was playing, I found that it was really fun to just equip the Guardian Angel and just throw out a bunch of grenades. Since the Guardian Angel does increase your grenade damage, the grenades does get the 5x multiplier and then the 2x multipliers from Flare, which is just really awesome, and it just basically is a great crowd control in AoE. It kills tons and tons of enemies. It just melts all the enemies around. It's really fun to use, and it's really fun to see all those chain lightnings going all around with the grenade. And you don't really have to worry about what the Iron Cub is doing by itself, because he's more than likely going to be killing enemies left and right without you even monitoring it. I'll be randomly across the map and just be getting kills from Iron Cub, which is just crazy that it can kill enemies very easily like that. And you'll often see that it walks around and just shoots whoever it wants. And even when the fuel gets low, I'll still see that the Iron Cub is able to deal 100 million plus damage per railgun shot, which is really cool. And because the railguns do chain lightning, you'll see that if you look at the map, randomly you'll see a bunch of dots just disappear because the chain lightning hits all the enemies. It's really cool. Next, let's move on to a skill tree. The skill tree does look a little bit wonky because we want to try to optimize Iron Cub damage as much as possible, so we aren't able to get our normal short fuse, but that's okay because Iron Cub's damage is the most important part on this build. So on the purple tree, we put 5 points in really big guns just to increase Iron Bear damage. Just put 1 point in the Buyer Fuse just to get down to the skill tree. 5 points in the Havoc, which just increases your gun damage, which is really useful when you're shooting a Plasma Coil or any weapon. Double Time, once again, another skill that we need to just put in to get down in the skill tree. I do find that the increased movement speed is kind of fun, but I wish we could put it into something more useful. We don't put any points in the big surplus because Iron Cub doesn't allow you to go into cooldown, which means while Iron Cub's active, you don't get any big surplus damage, which is very disappointing. And since most of the time we want Iron Cub to be out there as long as possible, putting points in the big surplus would just seem like a waste. Next, we put 5 points in Never Going to Give You Up. This just allows you to return Iron Cub's fuel really quickly, and the grenade basically just procs this left and right, so you're going to have this proccing all the time. You'll see your fuel going up. Eventually, this does diminish the returns to almost 0, so you'll eventually see that the fuel will keep going down despite you proccing this, so it's very unfortunate that that is a thing, so you can't keep Iron Cub out there 100% of the time, but it will get the job done until the fight's over, unless of course you're doing a slaughter shaft. And then we have 4 points into Nitro Engines. This once again was just 4 points to allow us to get to running on fumes, the end cap on the purple tree, but it is nice to have the extra cooldown rate and the maximum fuel in case you want that, but it's mainly just to get down to the skill tree. And then we got 1 point in the future creep, just increase your Iron Cub damage, very useful. And then finally, running on fumes just allows us to not diminish any fuel anytime we ignite an enemy, which can proc constantly with our grenade and all the stuff that Iron Cub does by itself. So you will see oftentimes when you send out Iron Cub, the fuel will remain at 100% without diminishing at all. If there's just enemies in front of you at all times, you'll never see Iron Cub go away, but if there's little periods of where you can't actually shoot anyone, you will see Iron Cub going down because of diminishing returns. After that lengthy explanation, let's move on to the blue tree. It's a lot more simple. We got 5 points in this Fire in the Skag Den, obviously to increase our damage, since the scales insanely with Mayhem levels. Next important point is Stainless Steel Bear, which just increases our Iron Bear damage. We got 1 point in Torg Cross Promotion to have a chance to double our splash damage and to give us a multiplicable multiplier of splash damage plus 6, which is very useful, even though it's just 6. And then we have Means of Destruction, which allows us to regenerate our grenades, which is very, very useful. And just 1 point in deadlines. This allows Iron Cub to not diminish all its fuel by just shooting the enemy, because that can happen. When you watch Iron Cub, you'll see him shoot and then the fuel will take a giant hit on the health bar. So it's nice to have just 1 point in that to help diminish that fuel consumption. Finally, we have the red tree, which is most difference compared to our last build. Since we reached level 72, we were able to get to Desperate Measures, which allows us to increase our Iron Cub damage and Moze damage at the same time. And because of that, we have 2 points in the third red line, which just allows us to get passive bonus from Desperate Measures at all times without getting rid of health gating. So that's very, very useful. 5 points in the Armored Infantry just to increase our gun damage. 5 points in Adrenaline Brass to increase our gun damage as well. It's one of the most important kill skills you can have on any character. It's one of the most powerful kill skills in the entire game, I would argue. So that's very useful. 1 point in Experimental Munitions to increase our incendiary damage on critical hit. And then we have 1 point into Vladoff Ingenuity just to get down to this Desperate Measures. That's a bit unfortunate. We had to waste a skill point on that to get to Desperate Measures, but hey, it's what we got to do. And Security Bear just decreases the amount of damage Iron Cub receives. Next, we have the Green Tree. This allows us to deal even more damage with Iron Bear. We have 5 points in Cloud of Lead. 1 point in Ducker Bear, which increases Iron Cub damage by 20%. Stoke the Embers once again increases our incendiary damage. Rushing Offensive, this allows us to get infinite lifesteal, which then in turns allows us to get infinite health gating, which is very, very useful. 4 points into Scorching RPMs, which just increases our Iron Bear damage. And then 1 point in Specialist Bear, which does work with Iron Cubs to increase our damage even more. So I know that was a lot, so let's recap all that again. Go all the way down to Cap on purple, go down to Tier 2 on blue, go down to Desperate Measures on red, and then go down to Specialist Bear on green. These are my Guardian ranks. This is my Mayhem mode. I like to use Big Kick Energy to increase our damage, but the rest is just standard Mayhem 10 modifiers that you can see on any build. Now we have plenty of other level 72 builds on our channel, so if you want to try that, first let me suggest my OPQ system plus Minesweeper Moze. This optimizes on gun damage 100% with Moze to deal crazy amounts of damage. Plus we optimize in crit damage to then encourage the use of the Minesweeper, so you're going to be aiming for crits to have the Minesweeper proc, which can proc indefinitely, which means a billion damage can happen without you even knowing. Next we move on to a Needle Gun plus Fantastic Light Amara. This build is really, really awesome because it just makes the ball go crazy around all the areas. It optimizes an action skill damage and gun damage at the same time. It does 1 billion damage very, very easily to the Grave Road and Raid Boss, so check that out. If you guys want a Moze build that is all about Iron Bear's fists and dealing melee damage with them, this build allows you to deal 1 billion damage with Iron Bear melee every single time you swing his fist, which is awesome. It also uses the Flare to increase your damage like this build, so if you guys want to check that out, click up there. If you guys want a Flak build that's all about Peregrine but dealing 1 billion damage as well, it uses the Fish Slap plus Unleash the Dragon to just deal crazy amounts of damage. Each rack attack sends out a grenade that is able to deal 1 billion damage plus a fire dot that deals 100 million damage per tick, which is absolutely crazy. And then finally we have a Flak build that's all about the OPQ system, but instead of firing with it, you use the drones and you can spawn them infinitely. This build allows you to spawn 2 drones per shot with the Infernal Wish, so it allows you to just keep spawning drones over and over and over, and whoever you point out will just die instantly because the drones will all gun them down. Alright buddies, that's all I have for today. If you guys want to use this build, there's a save file down below in the comments and description. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I hope y'all have a great day. Bye-bye.
And the last shall be first to immerse in a pass out heat, facing him out with a moxie melt till he woke up drowning in tchotchke hell. War in a cave with a torch on a wall, then a window arrangement of porcelain dolls.